Right, Graham Hunter is up next. First though, here's the trailer from the brilliant new documentary on Barcelona. Take the ball, pass the ball, based on Graham's book, Barca, the making of the greatest team in the world.
I don't care where you're from. If you tell me that you love football and you don't love Barcelona, you have a problem.
To play against Barcelona at that time, you just knew you had a bigger chance to lose than to win.
2011 was the best brand of football I've seen.
Yo entiendo el fútbol así.
Once we got that first victory, there was no stopping us.
Que fue un poco el comienzo de todo.
Everyone knew this guy is going to be the best in the world. And there was no doubt about it. After Guardiola came, that's where you really learn how to play the Barcelona way.
En esa idea, Pep arriesgaba en todo el campo, ¿no?
Yo pensaba, está loco.
Viene desde hace mucho tiempo, de la época de Cruyff, que creo que es una filosofía distinta. No es fácil enganchar la filosofía del Barcelona.
Solo con la noticia de que Guardiola va a entrenar al primer equipo, yo ya estoy sintiendo algo de que vamos a ir bien.
Él fue innovador en una forma de jugar.
Take the ball, pass the ball, take the ball, pass the ball.
Con unas fichas que tenían un talento especial, él las supo poner en ciertos momentos.
Pep says, I will bring you to the final of the Champions League, and it was like this.
Mira, pues te lo explico rápido. Mira, nos poníamos 3 contra 2. Estaba apretando tanto Mourinho, tanto. Ya incluso la gente del entorno barcelonista ya pedía algo más a Guardiola. Era la piel de gallina.
It's the result of how we play. It's how we play, and then the results will come.
Yeah, so Take the Ball, Pass the Ball is in cinemas from November the 10th. Graham Hunter is the architect of the whole thing. Graham, good morning to you.
Ger, one of the carpenters, not the architect, one of the carpenters.
Well, we can stick up the screen grab there. Your name is the only one, I think, that appears twice on the final closing credits. There it is, there at the top, and then the second bottom. It's like...
Look, listen, if either of you guys or anybody watching had been around a sports outfit like FC Barcelona under Guardiola, be it GAA or basketball or rugby or whatever, the fight game, you'd have tried to chronicle it, and that's all I did. You know that I wrote a book. I've been over to Ireland often to talk about that book. At one stage, a really smart director, a friend of mine, Duncan McMath, said, let's turn it into a film. We did. I saw Rupert Everett on the Norton show a couple of months ago saying, 10 years is what it takes, even with Colin... Is it Colin Farrell? What's the big actor who does Mr. Darcy and all that?
Firth,
not
Colin Firth.
Oh, sorry. Colin Firth. Attached to it. 10 years it took them to get their independent film made. 2.5 it's taken ours. And that's the power of the story. It's the power of... You both know I'm not a Barcelona fan. I'm an Aberdeen fan. But when you get the chance to be close to Abidal and Guardiola and Messi and Xavi and Iniesta and Mascherano and Piqué, and you have the opportunity to let them tell their story in a cinematic way, then you take it. And I suppose it was a labour of belief and a labour of love, both to write the book and to try and make this cinema-style documentary. But what we find since that trailer that you played came out, Universal tell us that about 440 million people around the world have had the opportunity to see it one way or the other. 1.4 million people have actually clicked on it on the Guardian website. It's exciting and a little bit confusing, and it's all down to the beauty of the football.
Yeah, well, congratulations on it. And I hope millions and millions and millions of people pay in at the cinema to go and see it. It's well deserved. Let's talk a little bit about the actual football this week then. And last week we were chatting about Lopetegui and the future and what it might hold. And yesterday, it's now kind of hour by hour, he's still the coach. I saw Dermot Corrigan tweeting, Lopetegui's still the coach. And it was like, this is now the news cycle that we're in.
Yeah, Lopetegui Watch isn't a lot of fun if you had to go through it in Krasnodar in Russia when the sort of 24-hour Lopetegui Watch began with him announcing that at the end of the World Cup he was going to take up the Real Madrid job. The mid part was the president saying, we'll have a press conference tomorrow to explain this, and then 24 hours later he was gone. He misjudged that. Quite how badly he's misjudged what's going on right now, I'm not sure, Ger. I think we can identify a couple of moments whereby his troops, when they play, haven't been well enough prepared tactically. That's the coach's fault. Beyond that, I take the version that Zidane offered us in May, 4 or 5 days after beating Liverpool in Kiev. He pointed out things are wrong, it needs a new coach, it needs a new attitude. Without naming Florentino Perez as a problem, Zidane made it clear that there were changes required in the squad, how the squad was built, and these things Lopetegui has inherited. I'm not sitting here pointing the finger of blame wholly at Florentino Perez. It's a delicate situation that they're in right now that you would argue that probably only Ferguson, Sacchi and Capello have ever had to cope with before. An unbroken dynasty of European success and how you keep people hungry, how you keep their minds alert, how you stop them from getting rust. And you're seeing mental and physical rust on the pitch at the moment. And while Lopetegui is not blameless and probably isn't going to prove to be the right guy to guide them through this, the culpability begins with the president, the lack of a director of football, the lack of a central strategy. And it rests, as Isco and Ramos have said in public, the real blame, whether it's their fault or not, the real culpability lies with the fact that the players are wildly off form right now, and maybe that's a hangover after a 3-year fiesta in the Champions League.
History shows us presidents don't sack themselves, so what happens next?
Well, the president doesn't sack himself. They're looking around. There's an actuarial situation going on right now, risk analysis of can they persuade Conte to decrease his claims on the settlement that is due to him from Chelsea. It was in his contract. He's got every right to tough it out. He showed at Chelsea when he knew he was being sacked and he would not yield, that he takes very seriously being sacked and wants his contract paid up fully. And therefore, can they get Conte quickly? No. Might they get him in the midterm? Yes. There is, and has been for a long time, if not a lust, then an eyelid fluttering between Florentino Perez and Joachim Löw. Joachim Löw may not be going through the best of times with the national team, the Mannschaft right now, losing and playing badly, but Joachim Löw's credit is very, very high at the Bernabeu. If he were to decide to walk away from the German job, if they could prize him away, in my view, not my recommendation, in my view, he is Florentino Perez's #1 candidate. But if you can't get the #1 German, the #2 Italian, they've looked within their own building and they've looked at Santi Solari, they've looked at Guti. Santi Solari is the standout of the two. Guti would be the more popular. Neither of them have the experience. There is definitely a level of counsel being offered from Jose Angel Sanchez, the vice president, to Florentino Perez, that if they appoint one of the two young, inexperienced candidates from within youth football at Madrid, and 5 months down the line, it hasn't gone well and they have to get rid of him too, it goes back to the series of sackings, which ultimately, in the build-up to Ramon Calderón taking over the club, it led to Florentino Perez stepping down in the middle of this otherwise unbroken 18-year reign of power and saying, I don't have the solutions. And the wise counsel is to Florentino Perez that if there is a sacking of Lopetegui, it can't be to appease media critics or the fans who haven't yet turned on Lopetegui. Lads, the wise words being offered to Florentino from within the club is, wait, get the decision right. And therefore, Lopetegui fights on, and irrespective of what happens against Victoria Pilsen, I expect him to be in charge for the Clásico.
Right, okay. Like, when you talk about hiring from within, that was obviously where Zidane came from, and I guess with the profile of Zinedine Zidane and the situation being a little less grim when he came into his position, it was an easier risk, I suppose, for Florentino Perez to actually make. Like, what separates the current crop from Zinedine Zidane other than that profile? Do you think that they're in a position that they've been cultured enough, that they've been experienced enough in the Real Madrid setup to actually step up and make improvements to the senior squad?
First of all, I think it must be pointed out that I like your point that it's this. Zidane was the second time that Florentino Perez reached, into his bag of tricks and pulled out a successful way, abracadabra, because he did that with Vicente Del Bosque. When he relieved John Toshak of his job in 1999, Del Bosque was an interim coach only. He did not feature in Florentino Perez's plans, and Perez actually found it very inconvenient when Del Bosque won the Champions League, and in 2000, 2001, it was without question an appointment that Florentino Perez was almost forced to continue all the way through to 2003. And I think that Zidane, having proved a successful candidate coming from within the club, that is part of what's on Florentino Perez's mind about can Solari or can Guti take over. The differences, as you asked, would be that look at Zidane and the emotional and intellectual links between him and the president from the moment at which Florentino Perez passed a paper napkin with the words written, "Do you want to join Real Madrid?" across a table in Monte Carlo to Zidane in 2000, autumn 2000. There was an emotional link between Florentino Perez and Zidane as a footballer. Remember, Zidane had been an assistant coach, he'd been director of football, he'd been a kind of general manager, he'd been an ambassador. And apart from the fact that Zidane is a special man, above and beyond being a special football person, he wasn't the first choice. At that stage, it was about third choice that Zidane would take over, and Florentino Perez reached to this trusted lieutenant with an enormous pedigree in football, far beyond that of Solari or Guti, even if not in out-and-out coaching in the youth teams was concerned. He reached for somebody who carried heft, who was his friend, who'd been talismanic to Florentino Perez throughout his reign, and that doesn't apply to either Guti or Santi Solari. So what you look at, like you did with Zidane, in their records is really rather, not moderate results, but insufficient football experience as a coach to persuade either the media, if you count their opinions, or Florentino Perez, that they can come in and manage these personalities, because it isn't simply tactics or training. That maybe you'll argue that it's the same at Inter, or it's the same at Manchester United or Liverpool or Chelsea, I don't know. I can tell you that from having spoken to coaches who come out of the ringer at the Camp Nou or the Bernabeu, the burnout factor is not the media or the results or the pressure, it's managing the egos in the dressing room. And that task is one that right now Lopetegui, although he hasn't lost their loyalty, isn't managing well enough.
One last question. Owen made a point a little bit earlier on about how Real Madrid clearly want Eden Hazard next season. Does that preclude them from going after Antonio Conte, given that there's tension between the two?
I take your theory building. I understand it. The first point to make to answer that is Eden Hazard, as I said to you the other week, will be trampled underfoot if they feel they can get Neymar. If Neymar won't leave Paris Saint-Germain, if Paris Saint-Germain won't sell, or if Neymar chooses to force his way back to Barcelona, which is very much the topic of conversation in Catalonia right now, then Eden Hazard will be Florentino Perez's #1 target. There's absolutely no question of that. Would Hazard and Conte be compatible? No. The transfer market information which would help answer your question is, which of the two, Conte or Hazard, is one, more likely to come, and two, more likely to be of benefit? Right now, Hazard, were he here, couldn't solve the problems and would get in the way of the development of Asensio and Isco. It might even lead to the sale of Asensio, who knows? Conte, could he solve the training ground problems, the tactical problems, the personality problems? Could he turn out a winning franchise? Yes. As we speak, if that actuarial calculation had to be made by Florentino Perez, then it would be in favour of Conte. I don't know if Conte would automatically say yes. He needs to assess. Taking over a big franchise mid-season is very, very difficult. But if you're asking me, which of those two men, if the button had to be pressed right now, in Christmas, not at the end of the season, that's a different argument, which of those two men is more valuable right now to Florentino Perez? It's patently Antonio Conte.
Graham, great stuff as ever. Thanks a million. Congratulations again on the documentary. It looks amazing.
Thanks.
It's Graham Hunter there.